Forward is doing. And then I'll talk a little bit about what's happening right now this fall, so folks are up to date on that. And then also where our program is headed as a potential model for ways that we can expand. And then from there, I'm going to really kind of shift to just talking for a couple minutes about ways that we can create change or advocate for change in the way that we're handling prescribed burning and fuels treatments across the county or across the state or even beyond that, to kind of help actually create the pace and scale that we need to change the way we're living with fire. And from there, we'll open it up and have some good dialogue. So I'm excited to kick us off. Let's see, I'll go ahead and share this presentation screen and enter slideshow mode. There we go. So I'm going to just dive right in. I am director of Audubon Canyon Ranch's Fire Forward program. Like George was saying, so I was hired in 2015 as a resource ecologist, and then as the need became apparent, we launched a dedicated program to changing the way we live with fire in the Bay Area. And we are approaching that problem and that challenge in kind of a three-legged way. One of those is organizing community. Let me see, can't see the chat when I'm in this screen share mode. There we go, okay. One of those is organizing community around prescribed burning. One of those is developing capacity for prescribed burning. And then the other one is leading implementation with monitoring involved in that. So let's see, how do I, there we go. So for organizing community, one of the ways we're doing that is we are one of the key initial leaders and creators of the Bay Area Prescribed Fire Council, which is a venue for partners to collaboratively promote, protect, conserve, and expand the responsible use of prescribed fire in the greater Bay Area. And that group is really kind of more on your administrative side, agency representatives from diverse stakeholders coming together and talking about kind of policy changes and sharing of resources and looking at that bigger picture of what this problem is and how we change the way we interact with it, as well as just bringing those stakeholders together in one room. And then we've helped create and facilitate and build the Good Fire Alliance, which is Sonoma County's Prescribed Burn Association. Prescribed burn associations are a model that comes from the Midwest, actually, initially. And out there, it was just groups of ranchers coming together, helping each other burn on each other's properties. But out here, it has a very different look. The Good Fire Alliance is the second ever prescribed burn association in California. And here we have much more diverse representation and diverse needs than say in Nebraska or Oklahoma, where you have these massive ranches held by very few landowners. Here we have many parcels owned by many people with many different backgrounds and needs, as well as many community members who are not owning land, who are just involved in trying to help. We also have led trainings and have developed a huge equipment cache that is dedicated to prescribed fire. So when we plan a prescribed burn, we are not depending on local fire departments to strip their engines of hoses or provide a snap tank and a pump, or even when we have 50 people sign up for a prescribed burn, we're able to issue all of them the $2,000 each worth of gear and equipment that they need to be safe on the fire line. And then we're leading implementation, such as the photos on this slide are from Martin Griffin Preserve, where we're leading this community of prescribed burners who are interested in making a difference and helping create change in actually putting good fire on the ground. With all of that, we're always doing ecological monitoring to make sure we're meeting the fire effects that we want and able to then also change or adjust the methods that we're using to improve the outcomes that we're looking for. Right now, we have a program happening in the Bay Area. It's called the CalTrex Bay Area event. And TREX is the abbreviation for Prescribed Fire Training Exchange. So that's a model that was developed also out in Midwest in 2008. And it's now an internationally used model where people come together, typically in the original model, for about 2 weeks. Also in the original model, oftentimes coming from all around the world to one place to get good fire on the ground, to conduct outreach and education around prescribed burning, and to accomplish training on prescribed burns. And what we've done, so Caltrex is a new offshoot of the Prescribed Fire Training Exchange model, and it's partly funded by CAL FIRE. And the Caltrex model really brings a new emphasis to the original Prescribed Fire Training Exchange. And so the Caltrex model is focusing on developing local capacity, because what we've found in other places with the original Trex model is that all of these people come together from around the world for 2 weeks. They're able to get a lot done in that 2-week period, but then they all disappear. And the local location that hosted that event now has no more capacity to do prescribed fire than they ever did, and can't make use of additional burn windows that show up when they show up, because they don't have the people who showed up when the event was held. And so we've adjusted the model, and we're hosting this Bay Area Caltrex event over the course of 8 weekends with all local participants. That also this year happened to be a great adjustment for dealing with COVID-19. So we're really excited about that. But really what we're seeing is that these incredible people right here in the Bay Area who want to be involved in helping to make a difference and change the way we live with fire are getting this 8-week intensive opportunity to build and develop skills and cohesion and get really good work done locally. So we're basically just kickstarting a dedicated workforce to address the issues that we have here at home. I wanted to share an experience that we had this summer, because I think it's the start of a really exciting and interesting conversation that could lead to bigger improvements in this model. And so this summer, and some of you might have read about this, a crew of 37 of us were hired on by Northern Sonoma County Fire District. And 37 of us, by that I mean 37 members of the community that calls itself the Good Fire Alliance. And this is diverse people, many of them who do not work in fire as a primary career, but they are all fire line qualified and trained as basic wildland firefighters. Some of them are artists, some of them are computer programmers, some of them are ecologists or land managers, but we are all hired on through the Northern Sonoma County Fire District to create a 20-person qualified Type 2 wildfire hand crew to support suppression efforts on the Walbridge fire. And that went really well. We had a really great proof of concept, and it looks like it's something that we'll be continuing to do into the future, where when there are local wildfires that need additional hand crew emergency support, we can get this Good Fire Alliance community of people hired on through the local fire district to be the additional resources that are needed at that time. And this crew, because of Fire Forward's equipment cache and because of the training that we've provided, they meet all of the standards of a professional hand crew and are able to operate and function on the fire line in exactly that way, with all of that skill and all of the necessary equipment. So it was a huge success. We were even able to incorporate a couple of the fuels crew members of Northern Sonoma County Fire District's dedicated fuels crew and give them that added professional development as well. So there are a number of things that are really needed to create change. One is that we really need earmarked dedicated funding for supporting fuels treatments and prescribed fire on private lands. A thing that we want to really make clear is that it will not work for that funding to be funneled through CAL FIRE. What we've seen is that that funding ends up getting pulled in problematic directions that don't end up accomplishing the work. And the amount of challenge in the reimbursement processes, And in the paperwork on the front end of all of that means that we're not going to be able to reach pace and scale in an efficient timeline. So we need that funding to be more locally developed and offered. Providing that funding through local fire districts or fire departments that already exist could be a really great way to accomplish the work that needs to be done. So incentivizing those local fire districts or departments to be directly involved in this work and commit themselves to it and see it as part of their expectation in protecting these areas is doing this prevention work. Right now, when we plan a prescribed burn, it's phrased as them doing us this huge favor to show up at a prescribed burn with a type 3 engine or a water tender, or to help us get water to our prescribed burn, when really we are improving the fire resilience and the fire safety of the landscape within their area. And so creating this incentivization and providing earmarked dedicated funding through them would make a huge difference. The other thing would be incentivizing them to commit their equipment. So even providing some amount of earmarked funding that tells them that they should be committed to bringing type 3 engines or water tenders or a short squad crew to support these prescribed burn efforts that are happening and organizing on local grounds would be huge. Additionally, looking for a use of that funding that would make a huge difference would be like what we see at Northern Sonoma County Fire District already. And I really like using them as a model because if we could expand on that, we could actually see significant change. Northern Sonoma County Fire District has its own dedicated fuels crew as of 18 months ago. That fuels crew that they've stood up could cost anywhere between $400,000 to $800,000 a year. And they're able to get out there and do shaded fuel break projects and really change the way fire would move across the landscape on a local level. And if all of the local fire districts and fire departments took that same approach and stood up hand crews or paid funding for local trained community members to do some of that work, we could really see a change in pace and scale. We also really need some of those hand crews or funding to support local community members to do prescribed fire unit prep. So beyond just creating shaded fuel breaks and doing fuels treatments, we need dedicated crews to prepare burn units so that they're ready to go when the burn window comes. And then we need those dedicated crews to support mop up, which is the day after you burn. You have to make sure your edges are secure, make sure your burn is self-consuming and staying within your perimeter. And so it's pretty easy to get 50 to 75 volunteers to come out for a prescribed burn because it's exciting, but it's really hard to convince them that they should skip a second day of work or a second day of their weekend with their family to stand around as everything burns down. Whereas if we had dedicated funding for that, we could make sure that we always had not just the resources to do the burn itself, but the resources to make sure that the burn is secure on the back end. So those are some of the key ways that we could create some somewhat top-down change, but on a local level that would allow us to really quickly respond to the need for change of pace and scale. Another way that we're trying to make a difference is rather than just saying that these local fire departments and fire districts need to stand up their own capacity, our program, Fire Forward, is next year launching a fellowship program, which will bring in probably eight in the first year, young fellows between ages of 18 and 27, who we'll be selecting, who are already community leaders, and we'll give them a 1-year really intensive training in how to lead or be a leader for the future of prescribed fire and fuels treatments in this area. Because something that we're seeing is that while Northern Sonoma County Fire District has a chief that is very forward thinking and has a very good understanding of prescribed fire and fuels treatment needs and wildfire and what's causing what we're dealing with now, many of these local fire districts and fire departments don't have that wildland background. And so they not only cannot really prioritize it because they don't have that understanding, but they would have a bit of trouble being the leaders that they would need to be in order to facilitate change. And so our program, Standing Up This Fellowship, would allow us to create the leaders that we need locally and then disperse them into the local community and have them available, and with all of the training and knowledge and understanding and experience that they would need to lead us into a better future. So that's one way that Fire Forward is looking to support this. And that type of model seems to be standing up in many places around the US right now, as we're all realizing we have this immense leadership in wildfire, but a lack of that similar leadership in prescribed fire and fuels treatments. So I'm gonna take a break there, and I think we'll shift to discussion from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sasha, why don't you go out of screen sharing so I can see the audience?
Absolutely. Let's see.
And that was very excellent start. Let me take the first question, and then I've got a couple of people with their hands up. I see Eliu and Marilyn. We barely, there we go. So Sasha, let's assume that Oakmont wants to do a really solid job of planning this kind of an activity as part of the, let me call it our Fire Safe program. We're a fire safe community. We want to do everything possible to reduce our contribution, okay? But part of it is we are backed into the wildland-urban interface, whether we like to or not. What approach can we take to defining what needs to be done around us?
So part of that question depends on whether you're talking about Oakmont property or the adjoining properties that are seen as the risk, right?
Let me then clarify. I think we're talking about whatever someone with your eyesight would tell us we need to be talking about.
Yeah. So one big thing we're seeing is that so community protections should start at the home and work out. That's one really solidly clear thing. You want to make sure your home is hardened against fire. You want to make sure then that you don't have flammable things around the outside of your home. And you want to make sure you have a defensible space. You go out from there. What we would see is if we were to reach a true landscape scale of these fuels treatments and see a cultural shift toward tending land, we could actually potentially see a change in the way, in the amount of energy that these wildfires have in these wildfire scenarios. They would still move quickly. There would still be areas that would create significant ember casts just because of the high winds, but you would have significantly less ground with severe behavior, and therefore less ground adding to this energy and momentum on these major wildfire incidents.
I don't know if you're aware, we actually have had sheep working in our fields, and that was critically important during the last fire because our fields adjoined an area that did burn fairly significantly, and it couldn't go there. There was nothing there left to burn. Okay, yeah. I've got Marilyn and then Elihu and then Byrne with questions. So Marilyn, you want to take the first one?
Hi, Dr. Berleman. Yes, in one of your articles, it talked about the aftermath of a fire. So for the last 3 years, if you drove through the Fountain Grove area, you look at that and you go, wow, look at all that burnt stuff that's left. That looks terrible and seems to put them at a higher risk than they were before the Tubbs fire. And now we're faced with the same thing. We go down Highway 12. Everything that didn't burn still looks pretty crispy and dried. So now it looks like we're full of fuel right across the street from us. would a prescribed burn mitigate that? And if not, what do you do? And why is there always this leftover dried stuff after a fire that nobody does anything about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's one that we're grappling with. I think that must have been from the SF Chronicle article, probably.
Yeah.
We're looking at that more and more as we've seen these wildfires move across this whole region. And what we're seeing is, I mean, we really live in a relatively unique place here where we have so much hardwood, resprouting hardwood across our landscape that's really the dominating scene that we're seeing is these woodlands that have burned at a really high severity because they haven't been tended in so long. And they historically would have been tended by cultural peoples, by various tribes. And so what we're having to do is, if we want to see a change, if we want to see those stay woodland structure, and we don't want them to convert to shrub fields, and we don't want them to further stimulate and trigger severe wildfire into future generations, then we have to take on the responsibility of going back in and doing a post-fire treatment to shift them back toward a tree structure that is resilient against wildfire and has a chance at really changing the way it interacts with fire in a wildfire environment.
But what do you do about all the things that are not the woodland, but that are in the median, or the things that were planted, the shrubs that are now all fried, but nobody takes them out? If you drive through Fountain Grove, the whole median is still full of dead stuff 3 years later, and nobody takes it out. Doesn't that make it more dangerous for a neighborhood? And that's what we're facing now. If nobody takes out all that dead shrubbery along 12, isn't it just fuel for fire?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, stuff in a median, like, or in like the front of or along the roads or whatever, all of that should be treated and set up for fire resilience in the future. And leaving it definitely doesn't help anything.
But I take it that a prescribed burn couldn't solve that problem because it's way too close to our homes, right? It's a much narrower, it's not a woodland, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's,
yeah, I mean, there are a couple questions in there. So I mean, you wouldn't do a prescribed fire in a median because there's no point. Like, that's landscaping, and landscaping is its own thing, and should be done by landscapers, and just should be done, right? Like, that doesn't make sense to leave a median unlandscaped and just like a bunch of burned twigs. So yeah, there's that. Prescribed burns also don't make any sense in chaparral, and we have a lot of chaparral in this area as well. So we should be cognizant of just the fact that we live in an area that is adjacent to some areas that are meant to burn hot and in a standard placing fire, and some acknowledgement of that is important.
Sasha.
So yeah.
We had a question come in that's an addition to Marilyn's point. We talked about post-fire treatment.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can look up on Hood Mountain. We can look along Route 12. We see lots of areas that need some sort of activity to move them into a safer mode.
Yeah.
Okay. So who's responsible for that?
So that should be on potentially the landowner, or, I mean, depending on how much we're looking toward a changed future where local fire districts or a parallel structure of fire protection districts and prevention fire districts or prescribed fire districts or something like that, that would be parallel and have dedicated skills and resources. But that work should be done by either the landowner or a responsible, dedicated party that's sponsored on a local or county level.
Well, the landowner may be the state in many cases. Eliu, you had a question, and then we're going to go to Bern and then to Lynn.
Yes, and my question in a sense builds on this, but I want to go on the other direction of Oakmont. Annandale. Annandale seems to me to need first controlled and prescribe burns if that's possible to create fire breaks. But I'd like to also talk about another tool which is used in the Midwest and the Southeast, which is modified fire breaks that are clear cuts in forests that have a significant break in the forestry so that fires don't spread. That's pretty common in the Southeast of the United States and parts of the Midwest and in parts of Europe. As far as I know, it's considered part of forestry, and various, well, I won't say more than that, but Annadel seems to need a lot of work as far as from my point of view, and I don't see anything happening, and I don't know if there's anything that can be done because it's state forest.
So one thing I'll say there, the Clearcuts structure, what would be known as flats in my work is where you have a whole bunch of little squares of Clearcuts, don't work well in California with our fire environment. However, shaded fuel break structures where we're maintaining a canopy that is intact and creates good shade cover, but then also clearing the understory so that it doesn't have a lot of fuel buildup. That's really all we need in California to see fire behavior completely drop. We can have 6-inch flame lengths where we just have reduced fuels in the understory while we have totally intact, healthy forest or woodland canopy.
Right.
Okay,
So
Bern, you had a question.
Just actually, I'm particularly interested in Annadale. What is your group's relationship with state parks?
So we are actually currently in the process of working with state parks to plan out a collaborative prescribed burn in Jack London. That would be our first one where we would be bringing the Good Fire Alliance community workforce to state parks to allow them and support them to get good work done on the ground. State parks has a very interesting kind of fire structure where each state parks unit by kind of region has its own story and approach and relationship with doing fire management. And this unit of state parks historically had a pretty good program, and then it kind of dropped off, and now they're very quickly trying to ramp it back up, but it's taking some time and it takes some work. But we are in close collaboration with them. They're working with the best burn boss in the US, arguably, who's now contracted by state parks to support their work. And we're looking at bringing our volunteer community workforce capacity to them so that they can get this work done on the ground.
Sasha, if Oakmont wanted to worm its way into that for the purpose of getting the next place, Annadel, can you help us figure out how to do that?
Yeah, if Oakmont is in favor of getting some good work done on the ground in Annadel, we can definitely bring that to their attention. I think state parks has been struggling over the last couple of years with this, and just as many landowners and agencies are, there's this desire to do more good work and also a fear that the public will react negatively. And I think they're all learning that the public actually really wants to see good work being done. But it's always contentious and it's a struggle, and there are people who are afraid of like protecting their careers politically and are afraid of risk. And so the more they hear community support for getting that good work done, the more momentum they'll have. So that's huge.
Okay, I've got two questions. Lynn, I haven't forgotten you. And Bernie, we'll come back to you. Why don't you take it first, and then I have a couple of questions from the chat room. Okay, from the chat, you mentioned earlier about working more with local fire agencies than with CAL FIRE. And part of your problem was that funding through CAL FIRE gets you into a whole bureaucracy. Is CAL FIRE on board with the fact that you would work with the local agency and then they would be auxiliary to that?
Yeah, so we actually, my statement around the funding structure and CAL FIRE not being the funder is in no way a slight to CAL FIRE whatsoever. They're a really awesome, dedicated partner. They've just been learning over the last 3 years how to work with us as a partner and to make sure that they're supporting us getting this good work done. They fully recognize the importance and just how critical it is that we are supporting getting work done on private lands where they don't have the capacity to get all of this done themselves. And so they've been like streamlining their permitting process and getting really clear language around what they can permit, what they should permit, how they should support it, how they should kind of network with us on that. And they want us to be working with the local fire departments to be the supporting capacity for the community that we've built. So they're fully in support of that structure, and they've actually done a lot of work to figure out how they collaborate with us in that way. So now we just need to build more of that capacity in working with the local fire districts who currently don't see prevention or land management as part of their wheelhouse at all.
Yeah. Like everybody else, they've got lots of other things they're working on.
Yes.
Lynn.
Yeah, my question also relates to Annandale specifically, but to forested areas in general. Is it possible to do prescribed burns to clear underbrush in thick forested area?
Yes, usually what you see there is a pre-treatment, and you can get a lot done without a broadcast burn, just doing understory cutting, piling, and pile burning. Like pile burning takes almost no skill, and it can be done in the middle of winter where there's very little challenge to getting that work done. It just means getting people out to clear that understory. So I usually recommend, or in many cases recommend, if you have a woodland or a forest with way too many trees in the understory, getting out there, removing some of that understory ladder fuel material and piling some of that material and then consuming that in winter. And that's usually in really overgrown forests and woodlands. That's that preliminary step so that we can enter after that with a broadcast prescribed burn and not have it burn hotter than we want. Because we're really dealing with these novel ecosystems right now that were never meant to exist, that have way more fuel on them than they ever had for 13,000 years.
Okay,
but
so
ever since the 2017 fire in part of Annandale, I've seen piles of debris and it never gets burned up in Annandale. I mean, it's scary.
Yeah.
All the fuel that's available for the next fire.
Yeah.
okay, Sasha, I'm going to go back to a question I asked earlier, but I get pokey about these things. If we wanted someone to look at Oakmont and the surrounding area and basically prioritize for us, here's what, if you could do it, here's what I would say you should do. Is your group a group that could do that?
I would say, so if you haven't worked with her before, Carleon Safford, who runs, or at least historically ran, the Sonoma Fire Safe Council,
Okay,
would be a good person to bring in. She's written up some really good community protection plans for various communities around Sonoma County, and she could do one for Oakmont. And a community protection plan would basically be something very much in that wheelhouse.
Okay. Now, I think we've tried to do that for the inner part of Oakmont. In other words, draw the perimeter of Oakmont and everything inside it. But where we're heading now, talking about Annandale and potentially the other side of Route 12, is wanting to know, if you had the ability to do it, what would you do that would go beyond that?
Yeah, I think getting a couple of representatives of Oakmont in a room, in a meeting with state parks and the other landowners that you may be wondering about in that area, and having a facilitated dialogue around that would be really important. That's where you're going to see change, is in that small room collaborating on next steps for how to create change.
I would say at the moment, we probably have the maximum attention on this issue that we would ever have.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that every landowner across Route 12 and everybody on each end of us, as well as the park, probably all are thinking about this as being an issue.
Yeah.
But it will disappear fairly quickly. Okay, and let me go one step further. Let's say that you could identify a, let me just simply say a management plan, okay? Because it does include getting rid of some of the understory before the burn and the whole thing, okay? And it was pretty clear to you how to do it, okay? Are there the people who can do it? Or does that involve having to start from scratch?
So that's where these kind of quasi top-down structural changes and the way that we see ourselves living with fire here are going to be really important, and incentivizing and creating dedicated workforces for that. We do have like a couple of, companies right now that you can hire that, like Snow Ecology Center has a crew that you can hire. I think there's also the Center for Social and Environmental Stewardship, which has a great little fuels crew that can do awesome work. There are a couple of like timber companies that can come out and do this work under very specific prescriptions. But we don't have a dedicated workforce the same way we absolutely do in wildfire suppression. And we need that. We need it to be year round, because fuels treatments happen year round and the planning of them. And we need it to be completely focused on this effort and cross boundary multiple land ownerships and local to any given area. And so we need to see that change. Oakmont and the surrounding landowners could go out right now and hire these crews to get some good work done, but doing that piecemeal and seeing that happen across the region here and there isn't going to create the change that we need.
Sasha, there's a substantial amount of money that came from PG&E to both the county and the city, okay, as part of the settlement of 2017, which is supposed to be going for things that will keep us from having as many fires, okay? Have you had any discussion with anybody about accessing any of that money?
There's actually a call scheduled tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 12:30 between a bunch of folks across the county, talking about how to advocate for best possible use of that funding. And then a close collaborator of ours in the Good Fire Alliance community, who's a representative of Mike Thompson, is also meeting with a group of the political stakeholders tomorrow at 4 to talk about pretty much the same things I'm telling you about right now, things that we need to scale up.
Yeah, because it would seem that, I think the total amount of money between the two is like $200 million.
Yeah.
Okay. And it would seem it wouldn't take an awful lot of percentage of that to be a real kick up in what you're doing.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Other questions, comments? Okay. One that came on the chat was, have you come into any discussions about insurance companies being at all involved in this process?
There have been some discussions. On one side is, insurance companies incentivizing landowners to get good work done on their property so that they can maintain their insurance. And then there's the other end that I'm more directly working in, which is getting better coverage for prescribed burning in private lands. And for the people who would be conducting that prescribed burning. So those are kind of two separate insurance related conversations. Both of them need work. And the insurance incentivizing landowners to take better care of their properties is, as I'm sure you know, a very contentious issue with arguments on both sides.
Well, in terms of your own property, we definitely understand that there is a link between the quality of what we have done on our property and our ability to get insurance or get insurance at a reasonable price. But now you're beginning to get us to stretch beyond the edges of our property into the adjoining property, because if the fire comes in at superheat, okay, because of the undergrowth and all of that, there's only so much I can do about protecting my home. Where did Iris go? Iris has explained to me carefully what I can do. So I've tried to do most of it. But there's only so much you can do if you got a lot of burning embers coming rushing at the house.
Exactly. And that's a real challenge where a lot of these houses across Sonoma County just, they're built long enough ago that they are not built to withstand significant ember cast. And that's the kind of inundation most of these homes are facing. So even if homes have been really well prepared in terms of just defensible space around their exterior, in some cases, that's really just not cutting it because there are these massive ember storms hitting these properties. And it may take, in some cases, that happening and then rebuilding with a better hardened structure to find a different outcome or a different future, which is a terrible, terrible place to be in. But unless we can reach pace and scale across the landscape in sufficient timeline, which the last few years have been pointing to us not having a lot of time for treating areas that have not yet burned, or we can do some significant retrofits on existing structures, which have proven to be pretty costly. It's not cheap to retrofit a house that was built long ago to withstand an ember cast. Those are kind of the options that we've had.
Okay, last of my questions. Let me take Bouvry as an example. You've done a lot of work there in terms of preparing that property. So how long before you have to redo that work? And if it took 100 hours to do it the first time, how many hours does it take to do it the second time?
Yeah, so what we're seeing on a large scale, so post-fire stewardship and pre-wildfire stewardship are kind of two different things. In pre-fire environments where you have that significant buildup of fuels in a novel ecosystem with a really brushy understory, we're having to do quite a lift just getting a reduction of the total amount of fuel, doing that thinning and then pile burning and then introducing prescribed fire and taking the prescribed fire slowly because otherwise we have too much heat because there's too much fuel. So that initial lift is significant. But once you've done that initial lift, you can actually retreat that area for very little cost and very little effort. So in those novel ecosystems that have not burned yet, we're seeing it's a significant lift and it's slow to get that first work done and it's expensive. And then after you do that, you can go back in every 5 to 10 years and do a much larger area all at once for much, much lower cost and with way fewer people and fewer resources and fewer equipment. In our post-wildfire environments, there's a similar expensive and challenging lift to do the post-fire restoration that needs to be done in woodlands and forests if they burned at high severity initially, or predominantly in woodlands. But once we do that, similarly, the re-entries are significantly less challenging, and we're able to steward them toward a better future that's resilient against fire and has a tree structure rather than a shrub field that was never meant to be one. And so it's really, if we can reach pace and scale with those first entry treatments in both the wildfire and pre-wildfire environments, we can maintain it toward the future in a much, much easier fashion, and really have no trouble maintaining it once we've created it.
Great. Okay. Available for one or two last questions. Sue Aiken, you want to cover yours?
Yeah. Back to insurance. favorite subject. That actually really hits home right now because one of the insurance companies dropped eight of our sub HOAs, if you will. And we have the misfortune of having our anniversary in November every year. So we get the worst of their possible, and their offer is 78% higher than what we've been paying. And we're not tucked up on, we're not back to back with Annandale. So plus we have, anyway, so my point is, how could this all do, how could we interface more on a different way with insurance industry to not feel like we're being punished, but especially those that we're very incentivized to do the landscape clearing and have been for 3 years and have a budget to show for that.
Yeah.
So what, it just feels like we're really out there totally alone, and there's no, they have one offer for us and that's that.
Yeah. I'm really sorry to hear that. That's part of, why this is such a big issue, because there's, on the one hand, they can help incentivize landowners to get good work done. But on the other hand, like, that's why insurance exists, is to like be there, and you pay for it so that it's there to help you out when you when you have a problem. So
that's right. Instead
them just kind of dropping all these people doesn't seem like the right solution, and it doesn't quite feel like incentivization either. So
no.
But it's our job also to convince them that we have done what we can to minimize the risk here.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question with Iris, and then Hugh, and then over to Bern again. Iris, you're on.
Yeah, I wanted to speak about our Firewise policy that just got passed. One of the major reasons, besides trying to save ourselves from being burned to the ground, is to be sure that we can have insurance. And to do that, we have to do the 0 to 5 defensible space. And we've asked for and have so far gotten approval of removing of all junipers. It's one thing to say, well, I don't live near the WUI area in Oakmont, but those embers travel, and if it starts in the WUI, it's coming over to you in the middle of Oakmont. So it's not about different treatment for different locations. I think the different treatment has to do with the areas that are just outside of our property, where the creeks and all of these other things that have this overgrown that nobody's taking care of. But we do have to protect ourselves for insurance. And the way to do that is for us to really rigidly enforce this new Firewise policy.
Yeah, being a Firewise community is definitely going to have an impact for getting and keeping insurance. It's a well-recognized just association to have. So
and the real estate law is changing, with state law is changing, so that even in the sale of a property next year, you have to show that you have defensible space, and you have to if they haven't done it, the buyer has to commit to doing it upon the sale of the transaction.
Okay, Hugh had a question, and then back over to Bern.
Sasha, Georgia mentioned that we could do all we could on our Oakmont properties, but we faced, the adjacent state park and what to do there. The fact is that there are portions of Oakmont property that are adjacent to creeks that are protected by fish and wildlife laws that prevent us from mitigating, the ladder fuels and whatnot that are in those areas that are our property. What do we do about that?
yeah, I mean, are they perennial creeks? Like they have water in them year round? Yeah. Your perennial creeks are not likely to be your worst threat zone, because just by nature of them having water and shade, they in many cases will not really facilitate high severity fire. If they were like vernal creeks that went dry for much of the summer, then I would say like that's more concerning. But by being perennial, being an overgrown perennial creek is not usually a huge risk for a high severity fire.
Well, we have some that aren't perennial, so.
Okay. Yeah. Those areas, I mean, hopefully we'll see some change over time. There's been some really excellent evidence and excellent science done showing that prescribed burning benefits riparian areas. And we just don't put torch fuel anywhere near the creek, like we stop a ways out. If this is in Oakmont, of course, that may not be a reasonable treatment either. Prescribed burning that may not make sense anywhere in Oakmont, but there may be ways to do some kind of restoration efforts where some, you know, like if there are invasive species in the understory of your riparian area, you could get some permission to remove those and replace them with something that was native and use that as an opportunity.
If I could have a quick follow though, Sasha, does your thinking about the role of perennial creeks being a sort of a buffer against wildfires hold true if it's a crown fire? And what about embers that are going to blow? I mean, the creek's not going to stop those.
Right, but a creek also won't contribute to embers coming in either. But what happens is, so California doesn't get independent crown fire. All of the crown fire that we get in California is dependent on surface fuels and surface fire burning hot enough and extreme enough that it builds heat and intensity into the crown and they move together. So as long as your surface fuels aren't dry and accumulated and built up enough to create crown fire, you're not going to have an independent crown fire in anywhere except for potentially they're starting to see it in the Sierra Nevada in like the Sequoia area where the beetle kill all happened. They're starting to see it there only for the first time ever in California. But we're not going to be seeing it here. Our crown fire here and our high severity and high intensity fire that is killing our woodlands and forests is happening because of the fuels on the surface that are heating up our crowns.
Okay, Bern had a question, then I've got Herm.
Obviously, we're very concerned about today and the immediate tomorrow. To get a sense for timelines as to what you're involved in, you mentioned that you're going to have a burn at Jack London's. When is that scheduled?
That is scheduled to take place. The plan is for it to be this fall / early winter, and we're looking at probably early December or mid-December for that burn at this point.
And just a quick follow-up. Assuming it goes as you plan it to be, what impact do you expect it to have on state parks? Because that's who we're concerned with, meaning Annandale.
Yeah, so I think that they are looking at this particular prescribed burn less as accomplishing a ton of great work and more as trying a model and seeing how the community responds or reacts when they do this, and seeing if they can make use of these collaborative efforts to get that good work done since they don't have their own capacity. So while this prescribed burn, it's pretty small and it'll only accomplish so much, it may set a stage for significantly more successful work down the road.
Okay.
Thank you.
Herm?
Am I on next?
Yep.
Oh, just a quick comment. All of these comments we've heard so far, including yours, Sasha, indicate that there's so much balkanization among the various agencies. And what is it going to take to get some centralization of authority and planning and so forth? Because there's so many people in there, so many different agencies involved now. I'm thinking of all the ones that just impinge on Oakmont. And it seems like there needs to be much more central direction. Is that possible, or do you see any indication that that's going to happen?
Yeah, that's where I really think that creating these dedicated resources on a local fire district level is going to create change and help with that centralization. So for example, in Northern Sonoma County Fire District's territory, that whole service area that they cover, their fuels crew has been able to get work done across pretty much any ownership that they identify that needs it within that local fire district. And so by having this one fire entity, really looking at maps for their entire area and saying, we need to facilitate getting work done across all of these properties, and this is how we propose doing it, and then pulling those stakeholders into the room, it really centralizes the conversation on a local level, which is really where you need it, because you need the people who are doing that work to be familiar with the landscapes, the ecosystems, and the problem areas, as well as the landowners themselves.
Can I ask a clarification, Sasha?
Yeah.
Let's hypothesize that we had such a meeting with the appropriate Sonoma and Santa Rosa fire crews, whatever combination that is. Okay. Do you imagine we could get someone from Annandale or state parks and someone from, following up on Hugh's comment, somebody from Fish and Game who would be willing to participate in that?
In the conversation around getting work done, or?
Yeah. Well, in the conversation about what's needed.
Yeah, I think you could, and I think you would need to in order to really facilitate change, right? So I think like Cindy Schaefer would be the person from state parks that you'd want to bring into the room.
Okay.
A lot of talk about Annandale.
Okay, we're essentially reaching an end. Sasha, I'm going to ask you to share a screen with us and put up your information about Audubon Canyon Ranch, which was your last slide.
All right, let's see. I think that's this one here.
Yeah, she works for.
Okay, so you want to do your 1 minute sales pitch for Audubon Canyon Ranch?
Sure. Yeah, so Audubon Canyon Ranch is a nature conservation organization working across the Bay Area in Marin and Sonoma counties primarily. Been around since 1962 and does a lot of really incredible education work with children, and has a really vibrant, beautiful docent and volunteer community, as well as a really excellent science arm as well. And we have programs researching mountain lions that many of you have probably heard of, and a program researching predatory birds or birds of prey, such as egrets and herons. And so Fire Forward is one program of Audubon Canyon Ranch. We officially became a program in 2017, and we're rapidly growing. So we have this really incredible like foundation bed of donors and small grants and family foundations. We are absolutely doing fundraising right now. We're actually currently trying to meet a funding match from the Farley Family Charitable Foundation of $330,000, and we're very close, and it's really exciting. And our budget is growing exponentially as we go into next year, bringing on 8 fellows from underserved communities to train them up to be the future leaders of this prescribed fire and fuels management effort, giving them all of the skills they need to really take leadership and take charge and lead us into a better future with fire. So yeah, I encourage people to become a member. We also, if you know anyone who you think would be really excited about joining the Good Fire Alliance community and getting trained up as a firefighter and helping us get good fire on the ground and coming out and volunteering, we're happy to have more there. And then you can learn more about Audubon Canyon Ranch and Fire Forward at egret.org, and find us on social media as well.
Sasha, thank you so much. That was extraordinarily useful. And we're all with you and hope we can find ways to move this whole idea forward. And thank you all. And we will see you either this Sunday or in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.